All right. Good morning, everybody. We are a minute after 1 o'clock, so we will get started. Thank you, everyone, for attending this morning. If you are here to learn about cybersecurity, you are in the right place. My name is Tyler Wyngarden. I am the Vice President of Strategic Development for TAI. One of the things that we care about at a statewide level is we don't want you to just be aware of cybersecurity. We know nationally it's Cybersecurity Awareness Month, but we want you to take action. We really do believe that taking even the smallest first steps can help protect your organization and provide you a lot of value. That's why throughout the month, we have educational sessions tied to Cybersecurity Action Month from different sponsors across the state. And I am thrilled this morning to have both Corey Weeklund and Seth Johnson from RSM here to talk about hack versus defend, the pen tester's perspective, which I think is a really interesting and meaty topic. I know that many of TAI members and organizations that we talk with are all actively trying to find ways to strengthen their cybersecurity framework. And I think a healthy pen testing and a sobering look at how you do pen testing is a part of that. So with that, I will turn it over to Corey Weeklund and Seth Johnson for an informative session. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Tyler. Hopefully everybody can hear me. I look like I'm unmuted. So I'll get us started. So thanks for the opportunity to chat with you all today. As Tyler said, we're going to talk about hack versus defend. You can see our poor gentleman here in the data center who's wondering what on earth is he going to do in the event of an attack. So hopefully today we can give you some pointers that will help prepare you so that you don't feel like you're alone in the data center. So I'll introduce myself. My name is Corey Weeklund. I've been at RSM a few years here now, 25 years though, plus in working with organizations across the infrastructure stack, securing them. And here at RSM, I and my team help our clients prevent bad things from happening from potential cyber threats, whether that's from advisory services up front or working with them through pen test or vulnerability scan exercises. So that's a little bit about me, what I do. Seth, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Corey. Hey, everyone. Seth Johnson, manager with RSM in our security and privacy and risk practice. 12 plus years of IT experience, really across starting out as kind of a help desk, moving up to sysadmin level, and then moving into IT security. So primarily focused on a lot of penetration testing, red teaming, social engineering work right now. Also do a lot with PCI and kind of NIST compliance frameworks. So yeah, pleasure to be talking with everyone today.
Perfect. All right, we'll spend just a couple minutes on who RSM is. I don't want to waste a ton of time here because there's better content moving forward. But for those of you here in Iowa who've been around for a while, maybe haven't heard of RSM, we used to be McGladrey, right? So if it was McGladrey and Pullen, RSM McGladrey, now we're just RSM. We're the 5th largest tax audit and consulting firm in the United States. So there's really the big 4. And then there's RSM. Those big 4 tend to focus in Fortune 500 companies, which leaves us as the first choice advisor for more of the middle market. So if maybe you're not Fortune 500, but you still need tax consulting or advisory services, we're happy to be part of the conversation and help you achieve your goals. So Seth and I both are in the consulting wing. Here in Des Moines, there are 8 locations of RSM here in Iowa. Seth and I are both in Des Moines. Consulting is actually about 40% of the people in our Des Moines location. You can see just kind of the breadth of what we do here. Seth and I are focused in security and infrastructure, but we do a lot with Microsoft. We do a lot with NetSuite. We do a lot with a lot of different things here, but you can see over about 10,000 clients. We manage both IT services and managed security services. And yeah, we do a lot along the way. In fact, when I came on board here 4 years ago, I was pretty surprised, kind of the bench and breadth that we have in a lot of areas.
Yeah. Just real quick, Corey, if you want to go back to that previous slide, chances are, if you need help with something, we probably do it, because to be honest, I don't even know everything that we do. It's a lot. And one thing that's not necessarily included in this slide is we have a lot of partnerships with both AWS and Azure around kind of the cloud infrastructure, kind of transformation side. So if you're doing any migrations from, an Active Directory environment to the cloud, or, looking into what that might all entail, got a lot of experience in that area as well. So
yeah, we do a lot of stuff, right? And I think that's part of the value prop. So we talk a lot about the power of being understood, and that's really understanding that things are changing for all of you all the time, and how do you navigate that? So there's really various areas, and this is all just within consulting, security, fraud, risk, privacy, M&A activity, various managed services, and not even just managed IT services, but financial and accounting, outsourcing, technology, digital transformation, whether that's cloud or data center, or AI, machine learning, data digital services. Like, we just do a lot, right? So just to kind of reiterate the point for Seth, even from a strategy and operations standpoint, if we'd love to have an opportunity to talk to you about any of that, but today we're actually going to talk about cyber. So let's dive in and stop talking about RSM. Seth, you want to get started?
Yeah, perfect. So I come from a pen testing background, pretty technical, hands-on keyboard type of work, and I've always been interested in kind of the mechanics of like how does that work? How are you able to go from like no access, or a standard user level access, to compromising social security numbers, credit card numbers, ultimately showcasing some sort of business impact for your organization. And this is going beyond just, getting domain admin, or, some sort of privileged access, right? So I kind of wanted to share with you all some war stories for my job, and kind of walk you through a couple different attack paths. So the first one is, we'll go from basically no access on the internal network to compromising thousands of social security numbers. And I'll kind of walk through that process and how that came to be. And then attack path number 2 kind of addresses more of the external attack path. So basically compromising an organization from the internet, and then ultimately able to compromise credit card information. So like PANs and CVVs and all that. So kind of want to walk through those 2 paths. And then at the end, we'll talk about how can we kind of prevent these, some information on how things to look for in your organization, checks you can do, and then we'll have a Q&A. So let's get into it.
Yeah, similar to Seth, I've always been fascinated by how the pen testing team works, but to a certain extent, Seth, you have the easy job. The hard job is how to actually prevent these, and how to stop you guys, or actual bad guys, from doing what they do. So we'll try to incorporate both here. Seth can talk about all the easy stuff he does, and I'll talk about all the hard stuff that needs to be done.
Yep. Perfect. So show of hands, or if you can like give a thumbs up in the chat, who here has like had a penetration test done before on their organization, or maybe a previous employer. Just kind of want to gauge the audience of, who has had this done before, who is this new to, all that stuff. David, okay. Got a few people. Okay, cool. Perfect. That's awesome. So I just wanted to kind of walk through what a pen test, and the mechanics of a pen test, and some things that we can talk about. So Corey, next slide. Perfect. So like I was saying, attack path 1, this is going to be for an internal network, right? So this will be kind of an Active Directory Windows type of environment where we don't have any access on the network. We don't have any user accounts or anything. And so we'll talk through some attack paths and things that we did to gain access domain admin, and then find some social security numbers. Next slide. Perfect. So one of the first things that we as pen testers are going to do on an internal network is look for outdated or missing patches. And oftentimes, when we work with clients, they have a patch management program already in place, right? So they, you can say, oh, you check that box, right? You have a patch management program. You push out patches every week, every 2 weeks, every month on some sort of cadence, right? What I have identified on a few of my engagements in the past is clients will have particular assets or systems that are not in their asset management, and that they don't really know exist, and as a result haven't been getting patched, or for one reason or another can't be patched due to some backwards compatibility reason. They need it for to run some old accounting software or whatever the reason. But one of the first things that we're going to check is for missing patches. And so that was the first step that we were able to gain kind of initial access to this particular environment. And so if anybody remembers back in 2017, the MS 1710 issue with Eternal Blue and the shadow brokers releasing a bunch of NSA type exploits. This is basically one of those. So MS 1710 was a RCE, or remote control execution vulnerability in SMB version 1. And it just so happened on this particular engagement that we found 16 systems that were missing this patch. And this was due to a handful of these systems were not in their asset management, and as a result weren't receiving patches. And then a couple were unable to receive patches for backwards compatibility reasons. So this first picture is a picture from Metasploit. Metasploit actually has a MS 1710 vulnerability scanner. So you can give it basically a list of IP addresses or host names. You can give it a file even, and it will list out kind of vulnerable hosts and their associated operating system. And so we were able to actually gain a system level shell on one particular host. I will throw out a caveat here. When it comes to MS 1710, it can cause issues with the host, potentially bringing it down. So, if you are testing this in a test environment, just be aware of that. And so we were able to, like I said, gain a system level shell on one particular host. And system level in Windows land is basically even more permissions than an administrator account. So we were actually able to dump the local administrator password hash from the SAM database. And then that kind of takes us into our next step. But before we jump to the next slide, there's a few tools that we used to gain our initial foothold. And I try to include these for you all, just so, if you want to spin up a test lab, or, you just kind of want to experiment with things in your free time, then you have the kind of opportunity to do so. So really, most of the tools that we use are open source. We do have some internal tools that we have developed that we leverage, but a lot of them are open source. So for example, Metasploit, MS 1710 scanner, Nmap also has a scanner, an NSE script that you can run. And then we were actually leveraging Impacket. Impacket is basically a kind of a suite of tools. They're actually Python scripts that can do all kinds of different functions. This one was actually able to dump local user hashes from the SAM database. And the particular Python script is secret dump. But there's another one as well called wmyexec that we'll talk about in a minute. Perfect. So, all right, we have local admin permissions on one box. So what can we do next, right? So a next thing that an attacker is going to do, or oftentimes a penetration tester, is they're going to look to see where else do they have access, right? Is this password reused? Is this, password hash reused on other systems? And so we actually used Metasploit's SMB login module to perform a pass the hash attack. So pass the hash attack is useful when you have a compromised a local administrator account, but you can't necessarily crack that password. So we could spend, some time, a few hours, maybe even a couple days, trying to crack this be an NTLM password hash. But in Windows, you don't actually need the plain text password to authenticate. You only need the NTLM password hash. So we can just basically try to authenticate to other hosts on the network with this local admin password hash and see if it'll grant us access, which is what we did. So we were able to actually laterally move to 20 other systems on the network using this shared administrator password. And you can kind of see that screenshot there. And it really kind of shows, it's easy to, reuse the same password on a lot of administrator accounts, but it is not the recommended solution. And we'll kind of talk about that a little later on. But this is kind of where we're at in the this attack phase. Okay, so now we have access to 20 systems, right? And this was a combination of both servers and workstations. And so now we're trying to ultimately escalate our privileges, right? We have local administrator on, a few boxes, but we ultimately want to get, domain admin or enterprise admin, some sort of privileged account to ultimately access sensitive data. And so since we have system rights on these 20 systems, this allows us to dump cache credentials from memory. So if you've ever heard of tools like Mimikatz before, that is basically what this is doing. And it just so happened that one of the servers that we were logged into actually had a service account credentials in memory, meaning that a service account had recently logged in to it. And that service account just happened to be a member of the domain admins group. And so being a service account in a domain admins group, that allowed us to ultimately gain an administrative shell on the domain controller. And like I mentioned a little bit earlier, Impacket is a really cool suite of tools. If you've never used it before, I recommend you check it out. Just run it on a Kali Linux box or any Linux distro. And it's a really cool tool that you can use to learn more about how credentials are cached in memory, how you can do pass the hash type attacks, stuff like that. So, and that's kind of what we see in these bottom two screenshots. Okay, so our job as penetration testers is not to gain domain admin or gain, X level permission. It's to, at the end of the day, showcase business impact to the organization. And why should people care, essentially? So we actually were able to leverage these permissions that we had gained access to. And we were able to identify some files, plain text files that stored social security numbers in Excel documents, which is, again, not recommended practice. But this is why we do these tests, to identify things like this. So the screenshot, the titles of these different columns might be a little hard to read, but information that we were able to identify included like contract number, member ID, first, last name of customers, social security numbers, date of birth, addresses, stuff like that. And so that's really what we try to kind of showcase on a lot of our pen tests is, what is the ultimate business impact? Or, a lot of our clients will give us objectives or, flags that they want us to achieve, basically. And so that's kind of what we were able to do in this first attack path. Next slide, Corey. Perfect. You might be muted if you're trying.
I was muted. Okay, well, hey, so that's fun and scary and all sorts of stuff. So what do we do to stop this? So as I walked through Seth's attack here, I noted all the exploit methods we ran across, and then so we'll also talk about our mitigation tactics that we can do. I will say I won't go into a great detail. You can Google, and Microsoft provides a lot of literature on how to prevent these types of attacks, not to protect against them. So I'll keep it relatively high level in order to keep things moving. But as Seth said, the first thing they ran into is that MS-1710 internal blue vulnerability, which was really that hacking tool that the NSA used for years on our adversaries before they bothered to tell Microsoft about it. And it really wasn't until shadow brokers kind of outed them that we all learned about it. But it's pretty common when I work with clients that we see this hiding out there. So again, mitigation is really an effective patch management program. I think the patch management program also includes things like validating that the systems you have in your environment are actually part of your patch management program. As Seth alluded to earlier, it's, if you're looking at a patch management report that shows 100%, but it's not 100% of your environment, you definitely need to, you're setting yourself up for potential trouble down the road. And patch management includes third-party patches, non-Windows devices, things like that. And Microsoft has upgraded SMB along the years. It's now on version 3.1.1, I think. So disabling SMB version 1, as long as you're running a modern supported operating system, is generally a pretty low impact thing you can do to also prevent against this type of attack. Okay. Then Seth did some pass the hash, grabbed a local hash out of memory, then played pass the hash. So what do we do to protect against that? It's a couple things. LAPS is Microsoft's local admin password solution, which manages the local administrator credentials for all domain joined devices. And they've now expanded this to Azure as well. So you can do Azure AD devices. But this, what this prevents is password reuse across your environment, right? So if you've got 1,000 endpoints, rather than have one local admin password across all of them, Windows and Active Directory will manage the passwords, change them every 30 days, so that if someone does get that local admin hash, it's really useless because they can't use it to move laterally. Windows Credential Guard is a feature that's part of Windows 10 and Windows 11, which is a nice one to turn on, which changes the way that password is accessible in memory. It's no you can no longer just grab the hash. It actually goes through a different process that encrypts it. So if you were to use Mimikatz, like he was talking about, you wouldn't see the hash. You'd see some you see an encryption key. So you would see an encrypted value that would be basically useless. This is on by default, but you never know when you might have turned something off from a troubleshooting standpoint. So move from Windows 7 to Windows 10 tends to be a good move. Hopefully all of you are done with Windows 7, and hopefully everyone's done with Windows 2008 and now Windows 2012 servers as well. But definitely something to look into. Microsoft also recommends a restricted admin mode for remote desktop. Put a question mark on this one because it's kind of moderate value here. It kind of this is only helpful if you assume the device you're using is actually already compromised, but something else worth looking into here. And I should also add, I think this becomes especially relevant here in the next couple. All these mitigation tactics are definitely something you want to test and pilot before you go and implement across your entire organization. So the next exploit was password reuse. So again, lapse is part of that as well. If you're an IT administrator, right, you might want to look at, well, you definitely want to look at things like having some type of password manager or vault, or a privileged access management platform. There's some good free password managers out there, but what they tend to lack is auditability and traceability. So if you're vaulting passwords, you want to be able to know who it was that checked it out, who accessed it and when, so that in the event something bad happens, you have an idea as to maybe what might have happened. And a privileged access management platform is also helpful. Privileged access workstations, they really broker that communication and have automation on the back end. So whatever password was used might get automatically changed on the back end as you finish your support session.
One thing real quick, Corey, just jump in here for privileged, account management. So often we see on a lot of our tests, admins will use the same password for their standard user account that for their admin account, right? So we also recommend, if you're not able to afford, a PAM solution or whatever, we also recommend increasing the length of admin passwords, which will prevent kind of that reuse between accounts. It's something that people don't always account for, but it's very, very realistic.
For sure. Yeah, you're jumping ahead on me a little bit right there, but a strong password policy. Things have changed over time. I think my favorite story about passwords is that kind of the 8-character password standard that so many organizations still use was really derived back in the 80s because over a 1200 baud modem, it would take like 60 days to crack an 8-character password. And given that has changed a lot since the 80s, the 8-character password still kind of rears its ugly head. So yeah, length kind of over complexity now, length over frequent password changes is really where the industry's going. But yeah, I mean, even if you get the password hash, but it's you've got a strong high entropy password, it's going to make it that much more difficult for somebody to take that hash and turn it into something. And I think in a future one, we'll talk a little bit about SMB signing, which also helps. But one thing, wdigest authentication is another legacy Windows thing that tends to still hang around. That actually allows for the storing of passwords in memory in clear text. So that's a no-no. So make sure you disable wdigest authentication, have a strong password policy, and we already kind of talked about credential guard. And here, the service account that Seth was able to compromise was a domain admin. Yeah, just don't do this. It's really easy to do, and I need to confess that I've been guilty of this in my past as a sysadmin because it's just easier than not. But far more often than not, you need far fewer permissions. Keep in mind, domain admins can create domain admins. Most service accounts don't need to go ahead and create other domain admin accounts. So make sure you're using principles of least privilege on your service accounts. Group managed service accounts don't actually directly protect against this type of exploit, but it does help manage the passwords, similar to LAPS does for local passwords. GMSA can help rotate passwords on service accounts. So that's kind of those are the things. There's more we'll show here as we move on, but I think those are the direct things I would have done in this case to have tried to foil Seth and his tactics in my environment. All right, Seth, you want to try path number 2?
All right. Yes. So path number 2. Okay, this one's a little more interesting. I guess there's just more hoops to jump through. So this is ultimately compromising an organization from the external network or internet. So that purple line being the perimeter firewall. We ultimately had no access to the internal network from the internet, but we did identify an older VPN that was deprecated, and the client wasn't aware that you could still access it. You could actually only access it through Internet Explorer, which was odd, but we'll talk about that a little bit more about that in a minute. And so we were able to basically escalate our privileges from that to domain admin or enterprise level admin and compromise some credit card numbers. Okay, so gaining internal access, right? So this particular client was using Office 365, like a lot of organizations do nowadays. And there was actually a username enumeration feature in Office 365 that allowed us to determine which usernames or email addresses are valid. So basically we fed it a list of email addresses or usernames that we scraped off of LinkedIn, and pair that with common username word lists. So think of like J Smith or S Johnson. Just so happens my name's pretty common. Stuff like that. And more often than not, there's gonna be someone with an email or username like that. So using this particular method, we identified over 1,000 valid users. So this basically provided us a list of users that we can target and perform, password sprays or try to get a little bit more information. We know that these people exist now, and so this kind of gives us a jumping off point. Okay, so like I mentioned, there was an older, outdated VPN that this particular client had that actually was disabled if you tried to access it through any modern browser, like Firefox or Chrome, Edge. It didn't render anything, right? And so it's like, oh, okay, well, nothing is there. But if you open it in Internet Explorer, because it was so old, it would actually render the page and provide us with a VPN login portal. It's like, oh, okay. And it just so happened that this particular VPN portal did not require MFA. This client had a newer VPN portal or solution that did require MFA, but this is just an older one, kind of, think of it as like the back door where MFA wasn't required, and we actually have a list of 1,000 users that we can then perform a password spray attack on. So if you don't know what a password spray attack is, it's basically trying one password that's very common. So say password 1, right? And you try that against your entire user list. So in this case, it'd be 1,000 users. So it's one password across 1,000 users. And the reason why this works is it's only one attempt. So you're not going to lock out the accounts because it's just one attempt, right? If you do 5 attempts on 1,000 users in 5 minutes, then you're going to lock all of those accounts out, depending on your how you have your password policy configured. But if we do one password, every hour, every 2 hours, it won't lock out user accounts. And more likely than not, we will get a couple hits because it's more often than not, out of 1,000 users, at least one person will be using a fairly common password. So in this case, we were able to compromise 32 different user accounts. And since this VPN portal did not require MFA, we were able to log in and gain access to the internal network.
Yeah, just to echo Seth's sentiments, even with even if it's not password 1, I know in my past life we saw autumn 2023 or autumn 23 or summer 2023 or Hawkeye 23 or Cyclone 23, very, very common variants on the same theme that, if you get a three try lockout, 2 guesses is sometimes all you need.
Yep. And so when it comes to weak passwords, if you have a standard 8-character password policy, more likely than not, user passwords are going to follow this format of, capital letter, start off with a capital letter, word, 1 exclamation point, or number exclamation point, or, hashtag number. Oftentimes that number is a year, current year, their birthday year, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's why we really recommend it a minimum 12-character password policy length, and we'll talk a little bit more about this. And also kind of enforcing people to use a passphrase over password, because it really does make my job a lot harder if passwords are a minimum 12-character length, because even if I am able to intercept a password hash, it's going to be hard for me to crack it. So okay, so we now have access to the internal network, right? So we have access to a couple user accounts, but none of these user accounts really have any permissions or administrative access. So one of the things that we commonly look for is misconfigured Windows protocols. So LLMNR, MDNS, stuff like that. These protocols are actually enabled by default in Windows environments. So LLMNR stands for Link Local Multicast Name Resolution. Terrible name, really hard to say, but it is pretty impactful for a lot of organizations. And so we can actually combine LLMNR with an SMB relay attack to basically identify systems that don't have SMB signing. And we can intercept network traffic that's going over LLMNR and forward that to a system that doesn't have SMB signing. So basically, I have an illustration that'll walk through this in a little bit more detail, but we're kind of impersonating, the original user that sent the request. So how it kind of works is step one, let's say I want to navigate to a file server on the network, right? And I just type in a UNC path, go / fill server instead. Let's say I just mistype it, or even sometimes the DNS server will be busy. It's not able to handle your requests immediately. So it'll say, I can't find this fill server, or I'm unable to process your request at this time. And so my computer, or my laptop, being the smart and resourceful machine that it is going to ask its neighbors, right? So it's basically going to send out a broadcast to other systems on its local network, right? So it's going to say, hey, does anybody know where this, fill server is? And what I, as an attacker, can do is say, oh, yep, that's me. I'm the fill server. Send me your NTLM version 1 or version 2 password hash. And my laptop's just like, okay, yeah, here you go. And then I, as the attacker, return an error to the client. And now I have the victim's NTLM version 2 password hash. So then what I can do with this is I can either try and crack it offline, or I can forward it on to another system. I can relay it and try to gain access to another host. Which is kind of what we did here. So in this first picture, you can kind of see, there's poisoned answers sent to these IPs. And you can see on the left that there's, NB, NBTNS, which is NetBIOS naming service. And then down at the bottom, there's LLMNR. So these are just kind of older legacy protocols that oftentimes aren't needed, but they are on by default, and they can cause a pretty significant impact to the organization. I assume if anyone has had a penetration test before, you have seen this finding, or this sounds familiar. We actually use a tool called Responder. It's a Linux tool, or it's a Python tool. You can really run it on Linux or Windows. And that's responsible for actually capturing the traffic. And then in the second picture, we're actually forwarding this traffic that we intercepted onto a host that does not have SMB signing. So you can see, the status code is success. So we now have local admin rights on that particular host that does not have SMB signing. Okay, so this is a really cool tool that I kind of want to share and talk about a little bit. So we have access to local admin access to let's just say it's a server that doesn't have SMB signing enabled. So what can we do next? We kind of have to figure out where we need to go and what users or groups we need to target to escalate our privileges. So this is actually just a sample data from the tool that's called Bloodhound. And basically what it does is it graphs out kind of your organizational structure or Active Directory permissions, in a sense. So following this first line up here, kind of up in the top left with this green picture of a person, you can see this is a user, right? If you see a green person, just one person, it's a user. And so that user is basically a member of this group. So this comp 00336 actually has RDP rights to this box. And it just so happens that this tpride user, tpride 0072, has a session on that box, and they're also a member of the domain admins group. So following that's the path that we will try to take. And so, again, this is kind of what we were able to do on this engagement is gain access to an MS SQL database. So it just so happened that, we were able to compromise a SQL admin account, and then just log in with, MS SQL Server. And there were some credit cards that were stored in their MS SQL databases. And so that is really kind of the business impact that we showcased for this particular client.
All right, Seth. So now that you've shown us how you got in, back to how do we stop this? So your first exploit method was a deprecated VPN. We already talked a little bit about, well, we already talked about patch and lifecycle management. I also like attack surface monitoring, really just to help you understand what you might have as public internet-facing services, external penetration testing, and external vulnerability scanning. Sometimes, it's just good hygiene if you've turned down, don't forget to turn off old stuff. Like my favorite way to mitigate any type of vulnerability is to turn off old stuff. It just makes me feel good. The second part here, strict to VPN without MFA. This is another simple one. VPN, it's 2023. Hopefully all of you have multi-factor authentication on any type of remote access. Hopefully you've got multi-factor authentication on administrative access, especially in cloud platforms. MFA is getting to be table stakes these days. From many organizations aren't going to even be able to get cyber liability insurance without this pretty low-hanging fruit at this point in time. So LLMNR, NetBIOS is really, like Seth said, disable kind of all legacy protocols. So you disable those two. A few other things, again, disable WDigest authentication. WPAD is Windows Proxy Auto Discover that lets somebody pretend to be a proxy on your network. Disable SMB version 1, NTLM version 1. Another one that comes up in some other cases where we've worked with Seth and his team that he didn't highlight is being able to, it's not a legacy protocol, but it's kind of more of an unattended protocol, and that's IP version 6 can be used if you're not using it actively. So what we don't recommend disabling IP version 6, but rather simply use like a Windows a firewall rule to just block incoming DHCP version 6. What that will do is just stop kind of the rogue DHCP version 6 server from popping up on your network and assigning addresses and pretending to be an authoritative source in your environment. But yeah, legacy protocols. This one actually is probably, it's such a large umbrella. And some of this stuff gets turned on long ago. If you set up a new domain today, some of this stuff would probably not be there, but odds are good you've got an old GPO that maybe is requiring SMB version 1 where you maybe don't think that it is. Microsoft publishes plenty of guidance too on how to disable those protocols. And SMB in general, so leverage an SMB relay attack. So you definitely want to enable SMB signing. That doesn't, all that does is validates that the SMB packet came from who it said it came from, kind of prevents that the hash type of stuff we were talking about earlier. Like I said, SMB version 3 has been out for a while now. You can require that. A couple of these have some asterisks. This tends to be like if you get into the encrypted SMB and Kerberos rather than NTLM authentication, definitely test those. Windows can handle that, but a lot of applications riding on top of Windows aren't quite ready for that. So these are definitely recommendations that Microsoft would make, that we would make. However, tread carefully, pilot, test, communicate before you do any of those things. And then from a lateral movement standpoint, there's a couple things you can do here. The easiest really is make sure that you've got some type of extended detection and response, some type of XDR platform or EDR on top. So EDR and then XDR to spot this type of behavior, something at the endpoint that would help detect that that's happening. Endpoint detection and response is more than just a tool, right? It's a capability. It needs somebody to actually look at that and help determine beyond the automated response what else might need to happen. So make sure you've got people that are looking at that tool and monitoring and responding as appropriately. If you don't have that in-house, make sure you find a third party that can help you do that. And then you can also look at network segmentation or things like NAC that would use like 802.1x to help identify the devices that are connecting to your network and profiling them and making sure that, okay, you're this type of device. That means you can do this type of behavior. Lateral movement's a little bit tough because it requires a lot of architecture to keep things going, but definitely an option here from a lateral movement standpoint. All right. So to kind of summarize, I put together 3 cybersecurity playlists. These are kind of the greatest hits, certainly not all inclusive. Many things you can do beyond what we've got here, but I'll start with the essentials. Covering some things we've already covered, maybe adding a few things we haven't talked about. Patch management, kind of beat that to death. Multi-factor authentication, again, table stakes today. Security awareness training, though, training your users. I think everybody here probably knows this, but the human factor tends to be the weakest link, and an effective security awareness training program can go a long way to helping your people spot potentially dangerous situations for your environment. Lifecycle management pairs really with patch management. That's making sure you're not running any end-of-life hardware, software, that when you've retired a device, you know where it went. You know that it's actually turned off. You know that the firewall rules associated with it were disabled. EDR really, again, table stakes today, moving beyond kind of your traditional signature-based antivirus. When Seth and I were working on this, I said, Seth, what's a good way to describe not crappy firewalls? And he reminded me of the term next generation firewalls. We run into a lot of cheap firewalls that aren't that actually have a lot of vulnerabilities. There are a couple in the last year have been really bad. We've fought a lot in the FortiGate space, where for the last 9 months or so, every other month, there was a critical vulnerability that came out that required rallying the troops and getting FortiGate devices all updated. So make sure that you're using enterprise-grade hardware, I guess is probably the best answer there. And then, of course, running a penetration test to prove out whether or not what you put in place is helping. Next steps. So extending your detection and response capabilities beyond just the endpoint to include cloud, network, DNS, things like that. We talked about strong password policies, and I'd say training users, like password reuse is probably the second most important thing other than having a strong password policy, is making sure that people know not to reuse the same password that they use at Amazon or Facebook or Instagram at work, right? Keep those isolated, because if one password gets compromised, all systems using that password are compromised. Overprivileged accounts. So make sure your domain admin, enterprise admin, schema admin groups, default admin groups are limited. Some of those groups should actually be empty most of the time, unless you're actually doing active domain activities. Definitely limit your domain admins. Talked about legacy protocols, but then also ongoing vulnerability management program, right? So pen testing is a good way to validate your vulnerability management program, but making sure that you're scanning monthly, quarterly, weekly, and actually doing something about what you find is really important to stay ahead of the curve. And then finally, our deep cuts. You can look at things like every hardware software vendor has a secure configuration baseline. CIS publishes benchmarks for just about everything, even going down to Adobe Acrobat, how to harden those per the Center for Internet Security. Talked about a couple of these, but we're also seeing clients move into passwordless authentication. So things like using Windows Hello for Business, you're moving beyond just like the 6-digit code, but actually using an authenticator on your phone or like a FIDO2 security key. So again, these are kind of the greatest hits, certainly not all inclusive, but should give you an idea of where you might be able to start. And I know we're kind of wrapping up here. So just one final plug. I'm kind of weird. I look forward to this every year. Seth and his team publish an attack vectors report that highlights what they find in their ongoing penetration tests. So this most recent one out on the War Room, which is our cybersecurity blog, is about a year old. I know we're working on a new one, but if this type of stuff interests you, you can always go see what's prevalent in this year. Well, actually last year on our blog, and know that I think here in the next couple of months, you should see a refresh of that on the War Room. Seth, anything to add on that?
Nope. New one should be coming out the next month or two.
Perfect. All right, and with that, we'll wrap up. So I know we really don't have a ton of time for questions, but I would say, definitely Seth and I were excited to have an opportunity to talk to you today. I love listening to Seth talk about what they do. But it's all about, in my opinion, how do we make Seth's job harder? How do we stop the bad guys as they come in? So if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to reach out. I know I publish a good amount of information on my LinkedIn page that RSM publishes. I think Seth does too. So we do have like 1 or 2 minutes if anybody has anything they want to drop in the chat. Otherwise, yeah. Well, let's see. Do we have time? Does anybody have any questions? I don't want to cut us off early.
Yeah, I've got time.
All right, Zachary raised his hand.
Okay, you ready?
Yeah.
Yep.
Do you think that Fortinet's done a good job since this summer in their response to the last vulnerability?
That's a guy. Yeah.
I won't quote you on it. I was just curious.
So my team is the team that responds to 0 days across our managed IT client base. My team's pretty frustrated with FortiGate right now. And we've gone to some of our clients that still have FortiGates and made the recommendation to them that they need to consider different platforms. Now, everybody has a bad run. Microsoft releases critical updates every month. They're definitely in the middle of a rough stretch. I'd say, if you've got FortiGates that are within kind of their depreciation schedule, just to maintain your vigilance, I do think there are better platforms out there that have a track record of, fewer exploits like this. I mean, to their credit, I guess, if I want to give them a little bit of credit, I think they are being very proactive in trying to identify the next one, which is, I think, why we're seeing so many of them. But I tend to see fewer issues in the Cisco, Palo Alto world than we do in the FortiGate and SonicWall world.